And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Richard Smith, also known as the UFO Teacher. Richard is a distinguished speaker and author that has captivated audience worldwide for over 2 decades with his transformative presentations on alien contact, the Moorish Legacy, human origins, and the profound implications they hold for our global society. Richard, thank you for joining me this evening and welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for having me on.
Well, Richard, can we start with your own personal contact with ETs and how that all started for you?
Sure. That's always a good place to start. Everybody has their origin story, but for the most part, my journey began during early childhood. There was a direct contact experience. I talk about this in the books too. Being I refer to, or entity I refer to as the Crone, which I describe in the book in detail as a female praying mantis. I talk about what she looks like. She showed up when I was 21. That was my first awakening. And that's when I found out from her that this is a multi-generational experience in my family. And this had been going on with me since I was 4 years old. And she had always been there in the backdrop. Sometimes the experiences came across as terrifying, awfully, and they were, as I got older, into my teens and my 20s, they were more transformative as I understood things better. But in that first awakening, there was a cluster bomb of memories that came back that during my earlier years before 21, I thought they were just dreams. And they came back all at once, flooding back as memories. And then I realized, oh, those were real experiences. And I looked at her and said, I know you, but how do I know you? It was just, your brain freezes up at that point trying to put it together. And that began what I referred to as the conversation from that point forward up to today. And she told me, I realized at that point that she was this obscure entity that I had always sensed was there in the backdrop of those experiences, but I could never see her. I could never quite put my finger on what this shadowy figure was, obscured in the backdrop of my experiences. When I turned 21, she felt it was the right time to make herself known to me because she had a question for me. She asked me, would you start taking downloaded information and turning it into your artwork, which is where I started off as an artist, and use it to teach the masses, use it as a form of communication to, tell people what's going on at this point. And that was back in the mid-90s when that started, because I was 21, I turned 21 in 1991. So heading into 1992, we start kicking off with all of this. There's a synchronicity there. She knew that I was looking to go back to college for my 4-year degree in communications to the visual arts program at the State University of New York. And so it just coincides. She says, you're going to be crossing paths with these professors there. Would you use your artwork that you're going to do to address these issues? And I said, yes. And so I started taking that downloaded information and turning it into those images. Some were paintings, some were mixed media sculpture. It eventually led up to a full-scale installation piece of work I did. And then I did the solo exhibition at the end of it all, after being there for 4 years. It was interesting doing that. It was a wild experience there because when you're doing that with your artwork and you know where it's coming from and you start having these contact experiences with these extraterrestrial beings, you feel like you're on the razor's edge at that point doing this. There's something new happening here. that's going to, transform the world around you and possibly around other people's worlds too. Sometimes the communication was telepathic, other times it was physically straightforward. She would appear herself, and that the energetic telepathic encounters had peeled back at that point for me an illusion of this world, and then it revealed a deeper multidimensional reality. Now, I was already, I would say, there and primed and ready to accept that. It was still something that hit me to wake up to it. But the thing is, my mom had already raised us on Star Trek and In Search of with Leonard Nimoy and Star Wars. That we grew up with that. And we weren't just looking at it as science fiction. Even at that early age, we're looking at it like, what if? And then Close Encounters comes along and blows the lid off of it, because then everybody started coming out of the woodwork with their stories as soon as they saw that movie. So I grew up in an environment that was basically, priming it so that when the first awakening came up at 21, she knew it. She made herself known, and it went from there on this interesting new journey at that point. It was like I was part of a larger unfolding encoded story in my DNA from the past, coming up back to the present. That's how the moniker UFO Teacher came into existence.
Well, let me stop you here because we have a lot of information to unpack. If we go back to the beginning, it sounds like to me that starting with childhood, you probably had reoccurring nightmares of a praying mantis being that you would probably consider as a child a monster.
It was partially that, and I'd wake up from that being like, what part of my world could that have been inspired by? Where does that even fit in? Other times, the more threatening experiences were adversarial ones, where it was realized, it's been realized throughout history, when there are children who are connected to this, there's always going to be those bad actors that try to come along and ruin it. Okay. But as much as they tried, they failed. And one example would be it going back to those experiences you were asking about, is one day I'm in it must have been about 5-6 years old when this happened. I'm in my bedroom. I'm surrounded by my stuffed animals, giant rabbit, giant lion, little teddy bear, Raggedy Ann doll, things like that. And a Rudolph reindeer doll. And all of a sudden they decided to just start talking to me in a very hostile and threatening manner. All of a sudden they came to life. But as I'm looking around, that's a terrifying experience to see that these trusted things in your childhood are now being weaponized against you psychologically. But I could see through it. I could tell, even as at that age, that there was something not right here. This is not really Raggedy Ann. This is not the lion. This is not the tall rabbit or the teddy bear. So before they could do anything more, I got up and left the bedroom, and they came chasing after me. And I made it across the hallway into the kitchen, which is ultimately, for some reason, I just knew that's the safe zone. They can't cross over here. There's a barrier here in the hallway. They can't come across and get in here, no matter how hard they try. And they stopped dead in their tracks right at my bedroom door, and they're leering at me across the hallway, trying to scare me. And I turned around and looked at them and said, you don't belong here. You should leave while you can. You're not supposed to be here. And as I looked at them, that whole facade of being my stuffed animals started to peel away. They picked up on it, and they start whispering to each other, he can see who we are. He's not supposed to be able to do that. And it turned out it was these other entities that I would later characterize in my book as the Greys. Um, and I have a very explicit definition of that, so that xenotype doesn't become like a blanket thing for other people's experiences. I felt it was important in the book. I describe them specifically and say, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about Zeta Reticuli. I'm not talking about the Ponti or other beings like that. Those are real flesh and bone creatures with a soul. These things, no soul. Cybernetic organisms, supercomputers on two legs, and they like to calculate all probabilities well in advance before they make a move. The thing is, they couldn't cross into, they were forbidden to come across. The kitchen was the safe area, and you see that symbolism in many different movies and TV shows where the kitchen is the safe zone. All right. I mean, traditionally, that's where mom and grandma cook. In the Matrix, that's where Neo went to meet with the Oracle all the time. So in the movie Poltergeist, that's where mother and daughter figured out what's going on in the house in the kitchen, and that was the root source of it right there. So I could, as I got older and I look back on that experience, I was like, okay, now I understand why the kitchen was the safe zone. And in my conversations with the Crone, she says, yeah, she says, I made it that way so that they couldn't come after you. And I sent them a warning not to do it again or else. And I never bothered to ask, well, what's the or else? So it was just, the implication was don't ask. So, but that's an example of, not, it's just different entities crossing paths in my life there.
If we fast forward to age 21, when you start having contact with her, how were you having contact at that point? Was it still like through dreams or through meditation, or would she ever physically appear in front of you face to face?
That time was definitely a physical appearance. That was right in my bedroom at that time. And other times it's been, it can be in my dreams. It can be telepathic through the day. Okay. I've noticed when I was younger, there was more of a physicality to it. As I got older, there was more of a telepathic quality to it because she's busy focusing on other children and I'm a full grown adult, but she still kept that connection with me. And there were reasons for that too. That when I started finding out about myself and my family history, and that my mother and my grandmother were connected to this as well. The Crone knew them. I think I got to talk to my mom a little bit about it while she was still alive. She understood it, and it answered a lot of questions for her, which is interesting because that's one of those moments where now the son's going back to the mother and explaining things to the mother. And then all of a sudden she's like, oh, thank you. Now these events in my own life make sense. The one thing I never had a chance to do was, because this all happened at 21 where it kicked off. My grandmother had already passed away when I was about 15. I never got to have that conversation with her, but I would love to have the chance to go back in time and sit down and talk with her about this and get her reaction on it.
So what did she look like? I mean, just kind of half praying mantis, half human?
So she has that bipedal build to her, 2 arms, 2 legs. Her head is very large. She's got large obsidian black eyes that kind of wrap around this way. She has what I would describe as maybe like Naples yellow skin, that kind of color. Of course, I guess being an artist, I'm picking out Naples yellow. It's not like everybody's going to think of that term, but she would always wear a dark brown mystical robe with a hood over her head. A lot of the times I would see her head or her face and her hands, but there were other times where the robe would open up and I would see the full body appearance right down to her feet. Most of the time, though, she was covered by the robe and it looked like the robe had a life of its own because it seemed to ripple and float across the floor as if she wasn't even touching the ground. But there were other times where I would see, oh, there's her legs and feet. Okay, so she is walking. Yeah, so she has, I would say, 3 fingers, and thumb. Okay. But they look more, I guess you could say, spindly or insect-like. So that's if you looked at her, you would see, yes, that's an alien, but there's also that quality about her that definitely fits with the Crone description you might get from Native Americans in certain Native American cultures. I actually had someone walk up in an audience one day after I did a lecture, and they said, you know, the way you describe the Crone, uh, the Native Americans have the same description too. And I forget which tribe or nation she was referring to, but she has her personality is very strict and strident, a harsh taskmaster at times, but also very caring. She's the eyes in the back of your head, and she'll always be there to defend you and back you up. So it was that kind of learning relationship there. My wife had a very productive relationship with her too. And that, I often joke about it when we were, I guess you could say, paired together as children. My wife, Linda, was put in charge of taking care of me because I was a few years younger. All right. And she talks about me in her book as, she didn't know it at the time till she met me, but she always knew there was this little redheaded boy that she had to take care of in these experiences. It wasn't until much later on at the opening reception of the gallery show I put on with the artwork that she came. We met each other for the first time in this world, here and now. We shook hands, and there was this sudden spark of recognition, like we knew each other. And that led to our friendship growing and sharing experiences and realizing, oh, we've been with each other since we were very young. So that's a lot of it there as far as it's direct contact, it's telepathic, it's I would characterize it as, in a more holistic manner, as an interdimensional hypothesis, where you have extraterrestrial entities, ultra-terrestrial entities maybe, that are actually communicating telepathically or frequency or spiritually or metaphysically, so that they don't have to do direct contact. And that is a form of, I guess you could say, guerrilla warfare, to bypass all the politics of non-interference with a not so evolved race. We're not exactly at that level yet, but we're getting there. And that helps to create that groundswell with the common people, everyday people like you and me, from the ground up, instead of trying to do it the other way, where you have the star nations who are trying to work from the top down to change the mindset of world leaders and movers and shakers, so that they don't feel like they're going to get burned at the stake by coming out and talking about this. But for the most part, the change is going to come from the ground up by both those physical experiences that have been going on since time immemorial, ancient astronauts, Betty and Barney Hill, Roswell, and so forth. And also these telepathic experiences, spiritual experiences, metaphysical experiences. A good example historically is the apparitions at Fatima at the beginning of the 20th century. And what took place there, researchers have looked at that and said, yeah, nobody bothered to pay attention to the fact that the thousands of witnesses that were there watching what was going on with these three children, everyone reported it was a silver disc coming down from the sky that blocked out the sun. And it gave off a frequency that in many cases healed people's illnesses, and it hovered in the air. It had a transparent quality. So you can understand at the time, we're crossing over into this spiritual religious experience that is still part of ufology and a UFO experience. And they even saw entities walking around inside the craft. When the oldest child was in her diary, which was never allowed to be brought to light until researchers started digging for it, Turns out her personal conversations with her mother were very different from what was being said in public. And her mother, since the other two, the boy and the girl, were her cousins, they were all very close. Everybody talked with each other. It was a very close-knit town. Everybody knew everybody. The mother found out from her sister that the cousin, the young girl, was shooting her mouth off about a lot of this when the three of them made a pact to not talk about it. So the mother comes back to Lucia, the oldest child, and says, I hear Jacinta is saying you saw Our Lady, as in the Virgin Mary. And Lucia turns to her mother and said, I never said that. She shouldn't say that. We didn't see Our Lady. I said, what I did say is that I saw a little white lady hovering over the tree, which totally changes the dynamic of what was going on there when you put all the pieces together. So that is another example of that spiritual and metaphysical interaction too, going on with that interdimensional hypothesis.
I'm assuming you're stating that the crone usually exists in another dimension, but occasionally she's phased into our dimension to kind of greet you. And I wonder if she actually completely phased in, or you were just seeing a hologram of her.
That's possible. I mean, over the years, I got to know that she is a very ancient primordial being of the universe. Her race is very old, older than anything the human mind could comprehend. There's still a number of them out there, even though they're diminished, which seems to be the trend as a race gets older and more ancient. They tend to fade away, and new races come along to take their place. But she's been there for quite a long time, and she is a member of what I describe in the book as the sisterhood. In many cases, you could see her as the leader. And so this is why they take a very strong interest in, let's say, gifted children throughout history. Back in the day, we'd call them Christ children. Nowadays, we call them indigos or super psychics or hybrids or starborn. And when one of them is born, they home in on it right away to protect them and make sure that the bad actors don't come along and try and sabotage that and turn them into something else much darker. So that's been going on. And so they basically act as the midwife between the galactic community and the children of Earth, so to speak. So they have very gifted capabilities. The crone herself, yeah, I've suspected that she's ultra-terrestrial of some kind, interdimensional, metaphysical, not exactly 100% physical, although I have touched her hand, her fingers, so I know that part was real. But like I said, most of the time, she was covered by the robe, which seemed to have a life of its own. Other times, I'd see the robe open, and there was her full body form. She is very tall. There are times where it seemed like she was anywhere from 9 to 12 feet tall, towering over me. But that's that could have been the perception of her presence as well, being younger, but yeah, I've often thought about that myself, that physicality versus the interdimensional aspect.
So you go to college and you create this artwork that's being presented or was presented. Was it some kind of extraterrestrial artwork? And if so, is there somewhere we can take a look at it?
Sure. Well, people can actually see the artwork at my website, ufoteacher.com. There's a section there at the top called Gallery. If you scroll down on the main page, you'll see it towards the bottom of the page too. And yes, that whole series was dedicated towards this topic. I laugh about it now because you think about how I had to approach this with my professors, who are all learned, established artists of an international nature. And then I had to take this idea and present it to them and try to make it legitimate for my tutorials and my exhibition as what I wanted to study and what I wanted to focus on. So You can imagine the kind of looks I got on that one, because it was something they had never heard of before. And there was one professor who remembered he had an experience crossing paths with Bud Hopkins at a party when Bud Hopkins was alive years ago. I think this might have been, he was talking maybe back in the 80s. But the real proponent of us all, the one who stood behind me, was my main professor, mentor, Luis Kamnitzer. He looked at what I was talking about seriously, and he saw where I wanted to go with it to make it stick in the viewer's mind, the way I was talking about it. And so he saw the politics in it. He saw the side of it that had to do with society and culture and economics. So he decided to take it on with me, and he gave me one mandate. He says, I want you to do this, but I don't want to see any, and these are his words, I don't want to see any of this airy-fairy crap. Keep it serious, keep it down to earth, and make it something that grabs the viewer and forces them to experience it, so that when they walk away from your artwork, they're taking the experience with them. And so that is what I strive to do for that whole entire series. It started out initially with 5 foundational paintings, then the paintings got a little bit larger, started involving mixed media sculpture. Then the paintings got really large after that. And I also did a mixed media installation. And then the final piece was this grand installation piece that I had buried in my mind from my experiences about, and some people have looked at that and said, oh, that's the Delta T antenna from the Montauk Project. And I never intended any connection to that, but that's what people got out of it at times when they looked at it. And so my intent was always, how am I using the space? How is the viewer looking at this 2-dimensional piece of artwork? How are they interacting in the round with the 3-dimensional stuff? And when they look at that particular image, what are they going to feel? Does it grab them? Does it pull them in? Does it make them walk through the experience instead of just being what others might do as an illustrational story? So, and in some cases, I think I succeeded on that. In other cases, maybe not as good, but there was a golden thread going through the whole entire series. There's a whole story to it in the backdrop. And for people who want to know where I was going with each and every piece that they see on the website, in the 3rd book to the trilogy, which I finished and published last year, part 3 is called Rise of the Invisible College. Towards the end, I devote a certain segment of the book to each and every piece of artwork and start describing them in detail as to where my mindset was at the time, and where, how I see it now, because I hadn't looked at the artwork really since 1995, right? So it's 30 years. And going back to that original set of artwork and looking at that stuff again, that whole series, you have a different set of eyes. 30 years have gone by, and it's like, oh, wow, there's a different interpretation to where I was going with this, and I didn't realize it. And I guess it goes back to something I learned from the Crone. She says, whatever you do, there's going to be 8 layers of interpretation to everything. There'll be the one you think you're doing, and then the one that others perceive, and then the ones you discover along the way as the years go by.
Were the images that you painted and created given to you in the form of a download?
Yes. Yeah, that was where the downloaded information started in, the telepathic conversation aspect of it. And then I took it and put it into an image and worked it such a way where it was something, whatever the subject matter might have been, it was designed to be something that the viewer felt like they walked away with something from it.
What would you say the Crone's mission is?
The Crone, as well as the Sisterhood as a whole, and all the members of it, are here for the sake of, one, protecting the children of this new generation coming about, to give them a chance to take the reins of destiny for humanity without outside negative interference getting in the way and skewing that. But they're also here to help humanity wake up to its own starborn birthright on this planet and in this entire solar system. The idea being that if we wake up to what's been going on around us, we also get to wake up to the legacy that was taken away from us that belongs to us, and reclaiming that spiritual sovereignty, reclaiming that starborn legacy that we were forced to forget about. And once we wake up to that, these bad actors have no choice but to pack up and leave, because if they try to force their hand openly in broad daylight, the benevolent factions will step in and say, no, you're violating the contract. They woke up, you have to leave. So the sisterhood is very much part of that movement. And they're, in their own way, if you think about it symbolically, they're working from the ground up by starting with the children, generation after generation.
Who are the bad actors?
Good question. And what I talk about in the book is things I've learned about the history of humanity, my own experiences as well. So there's a kind of a back and forth there, talking about my own experiences and also how that runs parallel to our human origins and ancient astronaut theory. Bad actors, first and foremost, I would point out the ones I describe as these cybernetic organisms, these supercomputers on two legs. I refer to them as the Greys. I describe them, what they are, what their purpose is. They work as the front line, which I know is a strange term to use because they work from the shadows, but they work on the front line for their masters, which are the reptilian queens of the Orion Empire. And the reptilian queens, the elite of the elite, are known as the Siakar. These are masters of manipulation. They've taken the idea of psyops to a level of an art. They've mastered it. As an empire, they work in conjunction with another empire, the Canis Empire, which is where we get the word canine from. And they are exactly that. They are a bipedal race of canine-like beings, which, when you put the two together, the vampire, which is also capable of producing this sense of shape-shifting in the mind of the human being, and then the Canis feudal lord, which is basically the dog, the wolf that stands up, you end up with knowing where the mythology of vampires and werewolves came from. The Canis feudal lords and the reptilian queens represent the foundation of what we refer to today as the two-party system on this planet. And that two-party system is something, we'll never escape it, but we can supersede it and evolve past it, because it's everywhere. I mean, we're inundated with it. You bring up the term two-party system, and we simplistically think of Republicans and Democrats. But once again, that's just the window dressing there. Other examples that people never thought of would be your Federal Reserve and IRS, two-party system. You have Big Pharma and the FDA, that's a two-party system, okay? You have the Vatican and the Israeli Mossad, that's a two-party system. So all the way down the line, you got the corporate conglomerate and the media monopoly, that's a two-party system. And there's also, that's always going to be structured that way because of the influence of the queens and the feudal lords, because the queens would make the decree, upper management, and then the feudal lords would carry out those decrees as middle management. They would go out and do the dirty work. And that's the way it is today. You look at any secret society, you have your upper management and your middle management. Upper management utilizes middle management like a sledgehammer, so that upper management can act like they're innocent and not get their hands dirty. And they can say, well, my hands are clean, I didn't do it. Well, that's because you have your minions doing your dirty work for you as a frontline. The Greys will play that role, and as they always have. And the thing that has always been their greatest threat has been the female principle, the feminine goddess energy, the vril power of the ancient world. And it's that vril power that was also known in the ancient world as alcheme, which is the power to move objects, move mountains. It was the source of power for building the pyramids in Egypt, alcheme. And that's the root word of alchemy and chemistry and Cometian mysteries, which is the Kemet, the original word before the Greeks changed it to Egypt. So you have that, and this is where the sisterhood comes into play, the vril power, the female principle. You will see this displayed in what I talk about as the invisible college in film. I would describe the sisterhood I describe in the book as a multi-genotype of various extraterrestrial races, but you'll also find humans in there as well, predominantly women, but you'll also see men in there. Obviously, my brother and I were there. So, and if you imagine a combination of the Bene Gesserit women from Dune with the warrior women of Black Panther, you'll have a pretty good idea of what the sisterhood is.
When you speak about the two-party system, it reminds me of George Carlin kind of talking about it and saying it's an illusion of choice.
Yes.
Would that be accurate for this setup as well?
I would say so. And I'm not sure if we can actually, if it's fair to point a finger at it and say that's being done on purpose, or if that too is a victim of circumstance, because it's well known that when you vote for somebody, the only way they're going to get anything accomplished is by just because the way the system is set up very poorly to really not support free elections. The only way that candidate's going to get any help is by reaching out to big money. Now, granted, you could get big money from a whole bunch of small donations from people like you and me on PayPal. That worked for Obama, but still he had big donations coming to him too. And that's the problem, because once you get that money, which can pilfer over into dark money at that point, then you owe someone your soul. And that's when your whole mission goes out the window, because now it's like, well, I got to make them happy, but in order to make them happy, I have to break my promise to the people. And this is why that's what, where you go back to what George Carlin said, the illusion of choice. I do think, honestly, that at every level of government, right on down to your local village, that the person who runs for office at whatever level earnestly wants to make a change. It's what they walk into, if they have the capability to withstand it, or if they unfortunately get absorbed into it. That's what makes the difference, is after they get elected, what are they walking into? And so we have this, what Andrew Bjago had said years ago, called it a breakaway civilization. I just call it the shadow government. Others might refer to it as the deep state or the cabal. But we've seen that mechanism, those puppet strings, as Congress goes head to head and locks horns with the intelligence community over the UFO or UAP issue. Well, by doing that, now you're forcing the media to basically pull their heads out of their asses. They can't laugh at it anymore. So now they're raising the question, well, if Congress can't get the answer, who's stopping them from getting the answer? And that puts that cabal, that intelligence community, in the hot seat. And they're playing it close to the chest. They won't give it up. Why? Because it goes back to what Richard Dolan said years ago. Those people who are in power are not going to give it up easily or willingly. And this is what we're seeing happening with that government within the government, which is, on the surface, it's called the intelligence community, but there's more to it than that.
You wrote a book called The Moor, the Mason, and the Alien, which are, to me, 3 different groups of people. How do they all fit together?
Oh, sure. That's a good question to bring up. I wanted that title to address the three main subjects or three main pillars that I had realized over the years, everything was coming down to in the history of this planet, the history of our human origins, right up to the present with current affairs. When you start looking at everything and get down to the brass tacks, you realize everything goes down to those three main pillars. And so what are they? Well, the Moor is a reference to the Moorish Legacy, which is that spiritual insurrection against the corporate conglomerates, or what I refer to as the corporate titans of Orion. So that was basically giving us a leg up. That's the Christ energy. That's the real power. That's the Temple of Solomon. Okay. And the female principle, the feminine goddess energy. It connects with Sasquatch. It connects with the sisterhood across the board. Wide spectrum there. But the core root of it is Moorish Legacy, the family of man, or what I describe in the book as the sun-kissed people of color and hue. Then you have what I would refer to as the other side of that equation, which is the Masonic agenda, or the Grand Masonic Lodge, which stands as an adversary to the Temple of Solomon. Now, once I explain what each of these mean, I'll get into the symbolism, because a lot of this does not have to be seen as physical. There's a spiritual, metaphysical, or metaphorical quality to this in all of us that we have been made to forget. And that's the part I'm trying to bring to light. But that Masonic agenda is more into the investment in the tradable commodities on this planet, in which case we at this point, those of us who live on the land, those tradable commodities, are seen as the chattel, which is a real estate term that evolved into the word cattle later on. And then you have the third party, the dubious one, which splits into two, the alien. And on one side, you have what I describe in the books as extraterrestrial intervention, which sides with that spiritual insurrection, are living in equilibrium with the planet, the Moorish Legacy, the Temple of Solomon. And on the other side, you have the alien abduction phenomena, which sides with the Masonic agenda, the shadow government, the Greys, the reptilian queens, the corporate titans of Orion, and that investment in tradable commodities with no regard for who's actually living on those tradable commodities. There is an understanding where those three elements are going. There's an old esoteric understanding that comes out of this, and it's I describe it as flesh and bone versus wood and stone. So on one side, you have flesh and bone, the investment in human evolution, the human being, the human condition, and living in equilibrium and ecological balance with the planet so that we don't destroy it. And then the other one is wood and stone, which is symbolic for investment in the real estate, the tradable commodities, anything that you can glean out of this planet and the whole solar system as a profit margin, basically strip mining the whole solar system. And that is how I came to the title of the Moor, the Mason, and the Alien, to describe all three elements colliding together, and that have been a key component of our human origins, ancient astronaut theory, interdimensional hypothesis, and the invisible college. So, and I decided, well, people are going to be somewhat familiar with the word Mason. They're going to be very familiar with the word alien. The one that most people will not be familiar with is the Moor. So that's why I put that first, the Moor, the Mason, and the alien, so that you'd be forced to see that word first and then question it.
Who are the corporate tyrants or giants of Orion, and what are they up to?
The corporate titans of Orion, yes. They are that two-party system of the reptilian queens and their the Dracos that take their orders from them, and the Canis feudal lords. So it's a conglomerate of these empires working together to expand outward and absorb, like a like if the Borg from Star Trek were real estate investors, that's how you could think of it. Okay, that expansion and assimilation and absorption of tradable commodities, solar system after solar system, with no regard for spiritual sovereignty or the people who already live there indigenously, or the fact that they are the people who live there are the rightful caretakers of that planet, and that you don't have the right to take that away. But that's all swept away, to the level of sometimes resulting in the genocide of that planet after everything is extracted from it. Years later, after I started putting the books out there, the first one actually, all of a sudden there was this movie by the Wachowski brothers or Wachowski sisters, called Jupiter Ascending. And what was funny at the time is that, I mean, I'm happy. I love the story, but people on Facebook were coming back to me and saying, Rick, they took your book and turned it into a movie. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of parallels there. Definitely. I'm glad they got it out there, because I actually took that movie and decoded it in part 3 of the trilogy, Rise of the Invisible College, and started, showing people the actual linguistic and etymological symbolism of what's going on there. So that's, I'm glad the movie was put out there. In some cases, it might actually make things easier to explain by just using that symbolism. But that's the corporate titans of Orion is that in a nutshell. It's that corporate expansion for profit and greed with no regard for anything else.
What have you learned about our origins? Like, were we some sort of Neanderthal or some sort of, hominid that was genetically manipulated into what we are today?
And the short answer would be yes, but that's kind of an unfair answer. There have been, nowadays, when you talk to anthropologists, they'll tell you flat out that there's no such thing as a straight line in the fossil record anymore. It's like this big jumbled up mass of, this ball of string that's all mixed up and crossing over, because the evidence that has come to light over the years is that we don't have a one track. It's not like traditionally we'd think, well, there was Australopithecus, then there was Homo erectus, or Homo habilis, I should say, and then Homo erectus, and then this ridiculous manufactured term, which means nothing at all, called Homo sapiens, which has nothing to do with the evolutionary record. We stopped at, if you perceive it a certain way, we stopped at Homo erectus, because it's been argued that they were us and we were them. You put a suit on them and teach them how to read, you wouldn't be able to pick out Homo erectus from the rest of the population. So, but knowing that anthropology has come forward and now is supporting what I suspected all along from the things I was researching over the past 30 years, there have been, in the fossil record, so to speak, you find anomalies that don't belong there next to a pelvis or a femur or skull, whatever they find at a certain level that doesn't fit. You got a circuit board, you got a diode, a capacitor, you have a footprint that looks like it's from an astronaut. Where are these things coming from? And then every so often, you end up digging up a spaceship that doesn't belong there either, but you never hear about that because that gets whisked away. So there have been many different influences coming to this planet, just as there have been many different influences of those coming to the Americas. Traditionally, we were taught, well, they came across the Bering Straits and then traveled southward. Well, we find out that's only one fraction of the story, because they also came across from Egypt to the east coast of the Americas. They also came across from South Africa to South America and then went northward. Okay, so Olmecs ended up, influencing what became Aztecs, Incans, Mayans, all the way up. And so the evidence is in the fact that why is it that the southern cultures, aside from the building materials they had, why did they seem to be so more sophisticated? Why did a pyramid in Mexico turn into a teepee in North America, even though they had advanced culture and society there? The city of Cahokia was kind of like the New York City of its time, right there in Midwest United States. And turns out they were located not too far from the Great Lakes. There were copper mines there. So that copper age you see taking place in Europe, there was no copper there. They had to get it from somewhere else. They were coming over and trading with the Native Americans. Well, that blows the whole narrative out of the water, because the way we're taught history is that everything is very straight-laced and isolated. This happened here, that happened there. No, we can't mix them together. Well, now we're finding out that because of that extraterrestrial influence on this planet, there was mass trade and naval seafaring going on all across the planet at all different times. The story, the mythos of Atlantis has now come to light as more than likely being true and the victim of the great flood, so to speak, of the ice melting of the glacier. Well, okay, that took that out, and that resulted in everybody moving around. You find the same evidence with Rapa Nui or Easter Island. What happened to the Moai statues there is similar to what happened to Atlantis, pretty much around the same time. So, and then you look at those statues that are still standing, and you start to suspect, well, look at the way they were structured with something on their head. Look at what was structured on their ears. Now, your academic would look at it and say, oh, that's just decorative cultural earpiece hanging from their ears. But a more trained eye would look at that and think, oh, that's a Bluetooth device. They were communicating with somebody up above, and the statue was done to represent that as a remembrance, as a record of what took place. So even then, in the statues, you have these references to technological devices that were being used to communicate with whoever was hovering around the planet up in space there. So once again, there's that relationship there. You have the wars that took place between two great ships in the sky that led to the Vedic literature of India. And you read that, I'm sure there's a religious mythos there, but it reads like a Marvel Comics when you look at it, the way they talk about their gods, which ultimately led to a great war that decimated that whole region from being a fertile region into being a wasteland of desert. You look at the sand there and you study it, and it's like, well, the only reason that sand glass could fuse that way was by instantaneous blast of heat, which does lend itself to saying, well, that would be an atomic bomb, possibly. You have the wars, the Star War, without the S, Star War, described by the Mayan culture. My friend George Haas, who has been looking into everything over the years between the Mayan and Mesoamerican cultures and their relationship to the geoglyphs of Mars, he came across that Star War, and there's a depiction of it. And you would be hard-pressed to deny that these things flying through the air aren't rockets being depicted by the Mayan, and that they went up against these gods and fought them back in some way, shape, or form. So there's that side of it. There's the other side that has been there since the beginning with these family bloodlines I mentioned. And every so often you see this jump in evolution. I brought this up once before. There's the epic example is the Lucy primate, which was in all the news in the 90s. I remember reading about it, and I went back to it a couple of years ago just to look it all up again. And the enigma about this is that, once again, anthropology was turned upside down once they had to admit that the fossil record wasn't accurate and it was all over the place like a big jumbled mess. And then they also had to eat crow when it came to finding the fossil of the Lucy ape. They were expecting, the whole controversy was, when did we start walking upright? what would be the criteria for that? So naturally, they would think, well, we're looking for a primate that grew a larger brain cavity, larger cranium, and then it would develop the intelligence to walk upright. Well, that didn't happen. When they found the Lucy ape, they found a primate with a very small brain who had a pelvic bone that virtually overnight in the evolutionary record let her kind stand upright. That also meant a massive change from the waist down with the knee joint and the ankle in order to support that quote unquote deformed or mutated pelvis. So this ancestor learned to walk upright with a smaller brain, and that turned everything on its ear. So when you see these things and they start adding up, you're like, yeah, okay, somebody has been interceding on our evolutionary track here for quite some time. The other evidence that comes to light is researchers finding evidence of cultures that go much farther back than the idea that, well, civilization only started about, 5,000 years ago. Well, now we're finding out the water erosion on the Sphinx takes the Sphinx back to at least 12, maybe 20,000 years. And so who was there then? And then the idea that other cultures, even on here in the Americas, ancient America, archaeological America, which nobody wants to admit to, that you're finding evidence of civilizations and cultures that go back even farther, much farther. So the question that comes up then is, how many civilizations, sophisticated or otherwise, evolved or otherwise, have come and gone before we got to where we are now? And who is still here from those lost civilizations? Because if you're dealing with beings that have no cell degradation in the way that we think, we think with average human beings, 75, 80 years, then we drop dead, okay? And that's only because we poison ourselves and we're supposed to live to 150. But you have entities like Swift Angel Gabriel, who went for 400 years so that he could get in contact with both Jesus and Gabriel. You have those kind of entities walking around the planet to this day. There's no telling how long the Sasquatch lived. Nobody's been able to figure out their lifespan. And so you have these walking records in their cell memory, in their racial memory, with the history of our planet hidden inside of them. The same thing is true of the mammals of the sea, the blue whales, the orcas. They all passed that on to each other. In fact, they developed a method of communicating transcontinentally through the oceans, because they discovered now there's a fourth state of water aside from the three we know, gas, liquid, and solid. There's a fourth version that can be used to transmit information through the ocean from one location to another, which goes a long way to explaining how these ancient mammals have been doing it all this time. And being able to communicate across the planet in this kind of like this neural net that the ocean is made up of. Okay, fine. If you're going to entertain that idea, then I think we have an answer as to why we have so many USOs coming out of the ocean. Why, aside from being a good place to hide, or an excellent place to hide, that neural net of the ocean from Mother Earth serves as a great form of communication for them too. So once you start piecing these things together, you realize, yeah, they've been here since the beginning. A lot of them, this whole imminent official first contact that we're approaching is going to reveal something quite shocking, that if we are not emotionally and psychologically evolved enough to handle it, then we're in for a sad awakening when we realize that the gods or God we've been worshiping, who we think gave birth to humanity, is going to be the same one that walks out of that spaceship, and may very well, the first entity you shake hands with may very well be your ancestor, your ancient primordial ancestor that gave birth to your family bloodline. And that's the biggest awakening for the human race.
Do you have a timeline for this?
So at this point in time, I'm in the century we're in right now, 21st century. I'm looking at the second half of the 21st century, so 50 years on, all right? Because it takes time for these things to develop on this planet. Just by reversing, because we're all walking around with psychological baggage because of our history in the immediate sense, history from our past lives that haunts us, as well as the history embedded in our cell memory and racial memory generation after generation. But once we tap into it, we can then reverse engineer the damage. This is the stuff that the benevolent factions are working on, or the the uh, the good guys of the star nations. Um, they have an investment in the planet itself, and they want to see us grow and survive and be mature enough to take over the reins of destiny in this solar system. We can't do it in our current state. And showing up at the front doorstep and walking out of a ship, well, you're going to create a psychological schism. Some people will just automatically label you the devil. Others will start worshiping you as a god. And then we're back to square one with the same problem again. You see that theme repeated over and over again in science fiction as well. Shows like The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits have explored those themes over and over again. Star Trek had explored those themes over and over again. Our misguided expectations we have right now is that we are in such an emotionally and psychologically damaged state from everything that rolled down on us from before, that to have someone, an entity of any kind, show up in such a grand state with the preeminence of sophistication, both spiritually and technologically, our emotional needs would immediately gravitate towards, oh, there's the one who can solve all my problems. And that's, you haven't learned the lesson yet. You're supposed to learn how to solve it yourself. It's your planet.
Where are you with life after death and what happens to us afterwards and where we go and do we reincarnate and things like that?
Yes, I think we do. I know there's a lot of people that will argue against that, but I think to negate it means you're completely sweeping away those individual experiences people have had. So it's the type of thing where you have to look at the individual that's had the experience. And for the most part, these people are everyday people. They have nothing to gain to talk about these kind of experiences, regardless of near-death, afterlife, UFO, alien, whatever. I had a definite experience with that. I would say both my mother and my grandmother, when each of them passed away. My grandmother was very gifted in a psychic sense. My mom knew it. My grandfather knew it. And she was very close. My mom and her had a very close relationship, and they talked a lot about this kind of stuff. I mean, my grandmother's the one who would sit there and watch The Man Who Saw Tomorrow with Orson Welles on HBO with me, okay, about Nostradamus. So I owe it to my grandmother to say, hey, that she's the only reason why I know anything about Nostradamus. But she had promised my mother. She says, when I die, if there is any way that I can communicate with you, I will. I'll find a way. And when my grandmother did pass away, I was about 15 or 16 at the time. I mean, that was a huge blow to the family, because then, your grandmother's the heart of the family. Once she passes away, things start to fall apart. And I saw that coming. But we kept our eyes peeled for other signs. And there was a moment shortly after her passing. We were on a family vacation. We're driving down the road. And I know my grandmother's numbers were things like 3, multiples of 3, 13. We're driving down the road and we're coming up upon this truck, a large truck. And I'm not sure, I can't remember why it had this on the back of the truck. but there, painted on it, were a bunch of different playing cards. Okay. And sure enough, there was 3s and 6s and 9s on there, the Jack of Hearts and all that. And my grandmother was real big on solitaire. So one, you have the deck of cards on the back of this truck. 2, you have her numbers. I looked at Mom and I said, "You see what's on the back of the truck?" I said, "That's Grandma. She found a way." It wasn't the way we were hoping, but if you know how to spot the signs, if that's the best she can do, then that's what you accept. Um, Back in 2005, I can't believe all these years have gone by, but thinking about it now, but back in 2005, my mom passed away after 4 or 5 years battling cancer. And she had also promised the same thing. So not too long after her death, I actually moved back home to help my dad with things. And one night in the kitchen, once again, there's the kitchen again, Mom's place. I'm standing at the sink washing the dishes, and outside the kitchen window, the window was open. So, there was the screen to the outside. And I happened to see it was instantaneous, but these 2 hands suddenly showed up on the outside of the screen. They glowed quickly and disappeared, and I recognized them as Mom's hands. That was one thing. Then you get into, those sleeping hours in your dreams when your alpha waves are higher. And in that same time frame, shortly after her death, I had 2 very powerful dreams. And this is how I knew my mom was on the same page with the Crone, and in her afterlife, this was her own way of doing things. But in one experience, I was working, of course, in Manhattan at the time, at the New York Post. So in this dream, and I know that environment is what influenced the dream, but in the dream, I get into a taxi cab, and the taxi cab had a different kind of feel to it. It's like there was something glowing about it that was different, but there was this urge to get into it. Well, sure enough, I get in the back seat, and there in the back seat is my mom. And all of a sudden, I couldn't see. The windows were like this bright glow. Can't see out the windows. Side windows, everything was a blur, zipping by, like we were moving at high speed. The back window was glowing. I couldn't see out of it. And immediately, my mom turned to me and smiled. And I said, "Mom, I have missed you so much. I have so many questions I need to ask you." I said, "Can you stay a little longer?" This is the dialogue I was having with her. And she said, "No." She says, "I can't stay long." She says, "I just wanted to let you know I'm okay. I have to go." And then all of a sudden I was pushed out of the cab, like suddenly booted out of the cab, and I was standing back on the sidewalk, and then I woke up. And it was very heartrending because she was right there and I wanted to talk with her and I couldn't. But it's like the cab was a metaphor for her traveling on her way. In a second experience, and this is interesting because this is where things start to cross over between alien contact and metaphysical or afterlife stuff. But I'm inside, as a lot of my experiences take place, inside this old mansion, which seemed to be this hybrid of an old factory that was broken down, a shopping mall, a train station, and an old mansion. Okay, so figure that one out. And I'm there, and it's kind of got this bluish light in it. It's very dim, dark, and there are all these ornate what do you call it? Glass windows, like ornate glass. I'm trying to think of the term. Decorative glass with these images on the windows all around. And it was these tall glass windows all around the outer wall of this mansion. Right smack in the middle of it all, there was nothing else around. But right in the middle of this wide open floor was this person sitting in a wheelchair. And as I got closer, I picked up on the fact that it's Mom. And I kneeled down in front of her. I said, Mom, it's me. We have to talk. She says, yes, but now is not the time. And right at that moment, these other darker entities, which I got the sense they were some kind of like a Komodo dragon or something described like that. They were trying to break through the glass windows. So the glass windows were kind of like this barrier, but they were punching through them and pieces of the windows are falling out, and they were trying to get into the mansion. And they were coming after me. And my mom in the wheelchair said to me, you have to go. I'll take care of this. And I said, Mom, no, I don't want to go. We can stand together. All of a sudden I'm thinking, we'll do this together. We're the dynamic duo. Let's go up against it together. No. And at that point, as they were completely coming through the windows and rampaging through, she touched my forehead and knocked me out. And then that's when I woke up from the experience. So I think that was her way of saying, I've got your back. Don't worry, I'll keep them away.
Richard, you are an author of, I think, 5 books, right?
4. The 5th one is my wife's book.
If people want to learn more about them, where should they go?
So if you want to learn more about them, you can go to my website, ufoteacher.com. That's for Linda and I. That's our official site. And on the main page, you'll see all 5 books lined up there. You can click on them. You can purchase them if you want. We have a special thing going on that if you get the whole set, we'll sign them for you if you want. But there's also a separate book link at the top. You can go there to that separate book section. You'll find the artwork there under the gallery link at the top, but it's also further down on the homepage. And you can get them at ufoteacher.com is where you'll find everything about us too, our bios, information about us, our history. And so there's even a section I've started on there, kind of like a journaling section, where I've started to write about my experiences and put them on there as articles too. And you'll see that on there as well. There's a contact link. If people want to, I always forget to bring this up. Big blue button at the top says contact. You can go there if you want to get in contact with us, for any reason at all. You can use that.
Do you have anything that you're working on that you want people to know about?
So I'm glad you asked. After I finished the last book to the trilogy last year, each book I do, I'm mentally exhausted afterwards because it's all flowing through me. So when I finished it, I even wrote this into the ending of the book. The Crone is there talking to me, and she says, okay, you've come far enough with this. We're done with it. Basically, we're done with this leg of it. Now we got to get ready for the next phase. And I left it at that. So the next phase that she was referring to is the fact that I'm gearing up for the next book in the series. I'm not sure if it's going to stand on its own. The trilogy will always be the foundation of everything I do, but the next book is going to focus on official first contact and scenarios, ramifications, effects of society, where we're at, where we need to be, and get into that as basically the book or the guide for people to read and get ready for what's coming around the bend here. So that's the next project.
Well, it gives me a good reason to get you back.
Okay.
So once you publish that book, let me know.
I just started working on it because it usually takes me about a year to get my head back into it. So yeah, I started piecing it together now. I just started putting the skeleton together.
Before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Yes, I would love to. And it's simply this. The truth has never been hidden, okay? The truth is within you. It's in the world you live. It's your legacy. It's your starborn heritage. It's encoded in your blood, your dreams, okay, and your soul. You're not just a witness to the shift. You are the shift. Okay, so you're not an observer, you're a participant. And that's the change in the mindset that you have to have. Contact is not something out there, it's an inside job from the ground up. The real disclosure begins actually when you remember who you are. Everything else is a reflection of that sacred truth. So that's what I would leave it with.
Richard, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's good to have you. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.